A man searched Twitter for people who said they wanted to die. He told them he was going to help them. He brought them to his apartment, and he killed them 9 times. And a criminal network with no name, no headquarters, no face, just a social media post that says, well-paying job, no experience required, and teenagers who say yes. This is the dark side of Japan's internet. Volume 2. In August 2017, a 23-year-old woman posted on Twitter that she wanted to die. It wasn't the first time she'd posted something like that, and she wasn't the only person on that platform expressing that kind of thought. In Japan, suicide rates are historically high compared to other developed countries. It's the leading cause of death among people aged 10 to 39, and with the rise of social media, thousands of people started expressing that pain publicly, in real time, looking for connection in their darkest moments. That digital space of vulnerability had an informal name in Japanese, Jisatsu-kei, the suicide world of social media, specific hashtags, communities, forums where people who were suffering talked to each other about what they were feeling. In many cases, that community was genuinely positive, people who discovered they weren't alone, that someone was listening and understood them without judgment. But Takahiro Shiraishi was also using it, and with a completely different purpose. Shiraishi was 27 years old at the time. He lived in a small apartment in Zama, a city in Kanagawa Prefecture, about 40 kilometers southwest of Tokyo. From the outside, he was completely invisible, the kind of person who exists in a city without anyone knowing his name or paying much attention to him. He worked as a scouter in the Kabukicho entertainment district, recruiting young people to work in the sex industry, approaching people on the street, identifying who he could convince, building enough trust to get someone to follow a stranger. It was work that had trained him in a very specific and very useful set of skills for what he had planned. How to identify vulnerable people, how to approach them without raising alarm, how to build trust quickly, how to get someone to make a decision they might not have made under other circumstances. When he discovered the suicide hashtags on Twitter, he found exactly the kind of audience he was looking for. People in crisis, often isolated, who would probably not tell anyone if they disappeared after going to meet someone from the internet. People the system had little chance of actively searching for, at least not in a coordinated way. The method he developed was methodical and calculated in every detail. Shiraishi actively searched Twitter for hashtags related to suicide, words like shitai, I want to die, or references to specific methods. He identified accounts that seemed active and in genuine crisis, not support or information accounts. He studied profiles, what they'd posted, when, what kind of pain they were expressing. Then he sent a direct message. The message always followed the same structure, carefully constructed and completely false empathy. He said he also had suicidal thoughts, that he understood the pain they felt because he lived it himself, that maybe they could talk, support each other, that maybe they could even meet in person, because sometimes being with someone who truly understands makes the difference that no mental health professional can make. What made that trap work wasn't the sophistication of the language. It was the vulnerability of the moment in which those people received it. A person in crisis who suddenly gets a message from someone who says they understand them exactly, who doesn't judge them, who doesn't give unsolicited advice, who offers genuine presence and companionship. That's exactly what that person needs to hear in that moment, and Shiraishi knew it because he had studied that space, had understood how it worked, had learned what to say and when. He also knew something else, that most of his victims would not tell anyone they were going to meet someone from Twitter, because those conversations were private, sometimes secret, held with people their families and friends didn't know existed. Between August and October 2017, in just 2 months, Shiraishi killed 9 people, 8 women and 1 man. They were between 15 and 26 years old. They came from different prefectures across Japan, Kanagawa, Tokyo, Chiba, Saitama, and other regions. That geographic diversity was one of the factors that delayed the investigation. When a person disappeared, the police in their region started searching without any mechanism to connect that case with similar disappearances in other parts of the country. Each one appeared to be an isolated case. None of them were isolated. He brought them to his apartment in Zama under various pretexts, but always with the same logic. Offering help, companionship, a safe place to talk without being judged. He was convincing. He had spent years practicing that kind of conversation in his work in Kabukicho. Once inside the apartment, he killed them. Then he dismembered the bodies. He stored the remains in plastic coolers, toolboxes, and garbage bags distributed throughout the small space of his home. The apartment was approximately 20 square meters. In those 20 square meters coexisted the remains of 9 people with Shiraishi's daily life. He cooked, slept, and kept using Twitter to look for the next victim while the coolers sat just a few feet from where he was typing. What broke the case open wasn't advanced forensic technology or brilliant police work connecting the dots. It was a brother who didn't give up. The 23-year-old woman who had disappeared in August, the first victim, had stopped responding to messages without explanation. Her brother, after weeks with no news, made a decision that would turn out to be crucial. He went through her Twitter account. He read the conversations. He found the messages with Shiraishi. He went directly to the police with that information. Police tracked Shiraishi's account and arrived at the Zama apartment on October 30th, 2017. What investigators found when they entered is something their own subsequent statements described with visible restraint. The restraint of people trained to handle difficult scenes who were finding something that exceeded any prior experience. 9 heads, bones, and other human remains in varying states of decomposition. Coolers and toolboxes distributed throughout the apartment. The smell was unbearable. The space, indescribable. Shiraishi was in the apartment when police arrived. He didn't resist. When investigators asked him what had happened, he confirmed that he had killed 9 people, without visible emotion, without apparent remorse, with the same calm he had probably used to send every one of his messages on Twitter. The trial began in September 2020, 3 years after the arrest, and was, from the start, extraordinarily complex from a legal standpoint. Shiraishi's defense attempted to build the argument that the victims had consented to their own deaths, that he had assisted them in their suicidal desires, and that therefore the crimes should be classified as assisted suicide, a legal category that in Japan carries significantly lighter sentences than murder. It was an argument that, had it succeeded, would have radically changed the sentence. The court rejected it categorically. The exhaustive analysis of messages exchanged on Twitter and online, Japan's most widely used messaging app, showed that in no case had the victims expressed consent to be killed by Shiraishi. They had expressed their own suicidal thoughts, yes. They had agreed to meet someone who claimed to understand them, but they had not agreed that that person would kill them. The distinction was fundamental, and the court upheld it firmly. Shiraishi was not someone who accompanied people in their own wishes. He was someone who identified vulnerable people, built a relationship of false trust, and killed them to satisfy his own needs, which prosecutors described in terms of control, sexual domination, and a pattern of behavior that had started long before Twitter existed. On December 15, 2020, Takahiro Shiraishi was found guilty of 9 counts of murder and sentenced to death. On June 27, 2025, nearly 8 years after the crimes, he was hanged at a Tokyo prison. He was 34 years old. It was Japan's first execution since 2022, and it reignited in the country a debate about capital punishment that never fully closes. The Shiraishi case generated concrete changes in Japan, some more effective than others. The government actively pressured social media platforms, especially Twitter, which received the most criticism, to implement automatic detection systems for suicide-related content, and to provide help resources when a user posted certain hashtags. Twitter responded with changes to its global policies and the implementation of automatic messages with crisis resources when someone searched for or posted specific terms. In 2022, Japan also reformed its assisted suicide legislation to make it harder for future similar cases to use that kind of legal defense, but what the Shiraishi case didn't change, because there's no straightforward way to change it, is the reality that social media continues to be a space where people in their most vulnerable moments look for connection, and that among the people who respond to that search, the vast majority have genuinely good intentions, but not all of them. The architecture of social media, designed to connect people, to facilitate conversations, to make private messages easy and accessible to anyone, doesn't distinguish between who uses those tools to give genuine support and who uses them to exploit the most vulnerable people they can find. That is the question the case of Takahiro Shiraishi left open, and one that Japan and the rest of the world still can't answer satisfactorily. There's something else in the Shiraishi case that's worth developing, and that almost no account of it mentions with enough depth: The scale of the systemic failure that allowed 9 people to die without anyone connecting the dots for 2 full months. There was no police failure in the sense of someone ignoring an obvious lead. The problem was more structural than that. In Japan in 2017, there was no centralized system that automatically connected missing persons reports across different prefectures. When a family reported that their 22-year-old daughter had disappeared in Tokyo, that information didn't automatically reach the authorities in Kanagawa, who might have had a similar report about another young woman from another city. 9 people disappeared in 2 months, each in the context of their own prefecture, each disappearance investigated in isolation. And Shiraishi kept using Twitter, kept sending messages, kept bringing people to his apartment. While those separate investigations found nothing because none of them had the element that would have made the difference, knowing the same thing was happening in other places at the same time. That changed after the case. Japan improved its inter-prefecture communication systems for missing persons cases, implemented early warning protocols. But those changes came after. They came because 9 people died before the system understood there was a pattern. It's also worth talking about what the Shiraishi case revealed about social media platforms and their responsibility, or the absence of it. Twitter in 2017 had policies on suicide-related content. It had the technical capacity to detect certain hashtags and show help resources to those who used them, but those policies weren't designed to detect someone who was using those same hashtags not to post their own pain, but to search for victims. The difference between those two uses is, from the perspective of a 2017 algorithm, practically invisible. Shiraishi searched hashtags, read profiles, sent private messages. All of that was exactly the kind of behavior Twitter was designed to facilitate. Connection between people who share interests or experiences that, in this case, that connection ended in 9 deaths, was not something Twitter's system could detect. Because Twitter's system wasn't watching. It didn't have the mechanisms to watch. And when the case came to light, the platform's response was first defensive and then incremental. Gradual policy changes, implementation of automatic alerts, improvements in content detection. Changes that, it should be said, came too late for 9 people who were already dead. The youngest of Shiraishi's victims was 15 years old. She was a high school student. She had posted on Twitter about her thoughts. She had received a message from someone who said they understood her. And she had gone to meet that person without telling anyone where she was going, because those were conversations she was having in private in the digital space where she could talk about what she felt without her family knowing. She was 15 years old. The case of Takahiro Shiraishi is the case of a killer, but it is also the case of a system of digital platforms, of police protocols, of communication structures between regions that was not prepared for the type of predation Shiraishi represented, a type of predation that required no technological sophistication. It only required understanding how a platform worked and what kind of people he would find there. Japan changed many things after this case, but the question that remains open is how many similar cases it takes before the changes arrive in time. Our next case also deals with how the internet became a recruitment tool for crime in Japan, but this time it's not a lone predator looking for vulnerable victims. It's an entire system, a network with no name, no headquarters, no visible face, one that posts job listings on social media, and that in 2024 surpassed documented Yakuza activity for the first time in Japanese history. I'm talking about the Tokuryu. On May 14th, 2026, 4 16-year-old teenagers broke into the home of Eiko Tomiyama, a 69-year-old woman who lived alone in Tochigi Prefecture, north of Tokyo. They attacked her, stole her belongings, and killed her. When police arrested them hours later, they began reconstructing how the crime had happened, and what they found turned out to be more disturbing than the act of violence itself. The 4 boys had met each other in person for the very first time that same morning, just hours before entering Eiko Tomiyama's home. They had never been in the same room before that day. They weren't childhood friends, didn't share a neighborhood or a school, had no prior connection of any kind. They had been recruited by someone they never met face to face, someone who had sent them instructions through an encrypted messaging app, someone who had promised them money in exchange for doing a job whose true nature was revealed gradually, in layers, until it was too late to back out. That someone was part of what Japan now calls Tokuryu. To understand the Tokuryu, you first need to understand what they replaced and why that replacement was possible. For decades, organized crime in Japan had a very recognizable shape, the Yakuza. Hierarchical organizations with clear command structures, their own codes of conduct, defined territories, and identifiable leaders that police knew by name and photograph. The Yakuza were violent and deeply corrupt, but also predictable. Police knew who they were, knew how they operated, and could build cases against them using conventional investigative methods. That model began to collapse starting in the 2000s, when the Japanese government implemented a series of anti-Yakuza laws that criminalized not just individual crimes, but membership itself in organizations designated as dangerous. The consequences were profound. Banks closed accounts for anyone suspected of Yakuza ties. Businesses could no longer sign contracts with people identified as members. Landlords refused to rent to them. Daily life became increasingly difficult for anyone who formally belonged to those organizations. The term Tokuryu combines the Japanese words tokume, anonymous, and ryudo, fluid. Japan's National Police Agency formally adopted that term in 2024 to describe a phenomenon that had been growing steadily for several years and that authorities had been monitoring with increasing concern. The Tokuryu are the exact opposite of the Yakuza in terms of structure. They have no fixed or formal hierarchy, no official name, no logo, no identity symbol, no physical headquarters, no declared territory, no initiation rituals, no codes of honor, none of the identity markers that made the Yakuza recognizable, trackable, and to some extent predictable. What they have is an account on X, the social media platform formerly known as Twitter, or on Instagram or TikTok, and an ad. That ad has its own name, Yami Baito, in Japanese, shadow work, dark work, and it's designed with considerable psychological sophistication to look exactly like what it isn't. The Yami Baito ads are a masterpiece of layered deception, and understanding those layers is fundamental to understanding how the system works. The first layer is completely innocent and deliberately generic. Hiring staff for well-paying work, immediate cash payment, no experience required, flexible hours. Sometimes with a photo of stacks of cash, sometimes with money emojis. The kind of ad that could be for handing out flyers, working at a warehouse over a weekend, anything legal and ordinary that pays well and requires no qualifications. Whoever responds, and many people respond, because the ad is designed to attract people who need quick money and don't have many other options, receives a private message. There, the second layer appears. The job might involve things that are in a legal gray area, or directly, it's a robbery, but without violence, just going in and taking something while the owner is away. The person who already responded to the first ad, who already established communication, who already visualized the money, at that point, many of them continue, because gradual commitment works that way. Each small step forward makes it harder to take a step back. The third layer arrives when the recruit is more committed. They reveal more details about the specific job. They say there will be another person, or that they need to enter while the owner is home, or that there might be unforeseen situations that require acting. And by that point, the Tokuryu operators frequently already have personal information about the recruit, their real name, their address, photos, family details, gathered during previous conversations. That information functions as an implicit threat if the recruit tries to back out. They don't need to say it explicitly, the recruit understands. It's a funnel system designed with sales logic, filtering out at each stage those who are going to drop out, and committing more deeply those who continue. At the end of the funnel is a person standing on a street corner waiting for instructions arriving through an encrypted app, ready to do something they never planned to do when they responded to that first job listing. The leaders of the Tokuryu never show up. They're never at the scene of the crime. They never personally meet the recruits who carry out the work. That characteristic is the heart of the system, and the reason it's so difficult to dismantle for Japanese authorities. A Tokuryu leader can operate from anywhere with an internet connection. Tokyo, Manila, Shanghai, anywhere. They use encrypted apps to communicate with intermediaries. They use anonymous accounts created specifically for each operation and discarded afterward. They use intermediaries, people who also don't know their real identity, who were themselves recruited through the system, to communicate with recruits in the field and relay instructions. When an operation ends successfully or with arrests, the Tokuryu dissolves. The recruits who did the physical work are caught by police. The intermediary disappears from the app. The leader deletes the account, creates a new one in minutes, and posts a new ad. The cycle starts again. The 4 16-year-old teenagers who killed Aiko Tomiyama in Tochigi were arrested. The couple in their mid-20s who acted as intermediaries and relayed instructions on the day of the crime were also detained. But the person, or people, who organized the operation, who identified the target, who coordinated the logistics from behind a screen, those people are still free. They've probably organized another operation since then. They've probably already posted another ad. The Tokuryu leaders have a marked and documented preference for recruiting teenagers. And that preference isn't accidental. It's a deliberate strategy based on a reality of Japan's legal system. In Japan, people under 18 are processed by family courts, not adult criminal courts. Sentences are significantly lighter. The names of minor defendants are generally not made public. And there is a perception, correct, that teenagers are easier to manipulate, more in need of quick money, and less likely to have the life experience needed to detect that they're being used as disposable tools. A National Police Agency official said it plainly in 2026. The masterminds behind the Tokuryu deliberately assign minors to roles with a high risk of being caught, effectively treating them as disposable. Disposable. That was the word the official used. The teenagers who respond to Yamibaito ads generally share certain profiles. Difficult economic situations, family problems, periods of disconnection from the educational system, moments in their lives where the promise of quick and easy money seems more concrete than any other visible option. Tokuryu leaders know how to identify those profiles. They know which platforms they frequent. They know what kind of language to use in ads to reach them specifically. And when the arrests come, because arrests always come for those who do the visible physical work, the leaders are already somewhere else, running another account, recruiting another person. The scale of the phenomenon is difficult to process in concrete terms. In 2024, arrests linked to Tokuryu activity exceeded Yakuza-linked arrests for the first time in Japan's history. 10,105 against fewer than 9,900. For the first time ever, anonymous digitally coordinated crime exceeded documented activity by Japan's traditional organized crime, which had dominated the organized crime landscape for decades. In 2025, the National Police Agency reported that 12,178 individuals were subject to measures related to Tokuryu groups. Of those, 1,322 were under 20 years old. Approximately 40% of all suspects in violent robbery cases linked to Tokuryu were minors. The NPA estimates that approximately 90,000 people receive Yamibaito ads per month in Japan. 90,000 per month. The Japanese government responded with a massive public awareness campaign. Posters in subway stations. Warnings on the very platforms where the ads circulate. Tokyo Metropolitan Police Superintendent General Yuji Sakurada declared in October 2024, "We must weaken these anonymous and fluid groups as soon as possible and drive them to destruction." The groups keep operating. There's something about the Tokuryu phenomenon that says something broader about the digital age, and that goes well beyond Japan. The founding promise of the internet was always the democratization of access to information, to opportunities, to connection, to resources that before were only available to those with money or connections. That promise was fulfilled in many ways, but the same architecture that democratized access to the positive also democratized access to what previously required structure, resources, and visibility to operate. Before the internet, organizing a criminal network that operated in multiple cities simultaneously, that constantly recruited new members, that maintained its leaders' anonymity, and that dissolved and reorganized quickly under police pressure, all of that required investment, logistics, and physical infrastructure that also created vulnerabilities and exposure points. Today, it requires an account on X and an encrypted messaging app. Free tools, accessible to anyone, originally designed for completely legitimate purposes. The same tools journalists use to protect their sources in authoritarian countries. The same ones activists use to organize without being monitored. The same ones millions of people use every day to talk with their families and friends. Those same tools are what Tokuryu leaders use to coordinate criminal operations without being identified. That duality has no simple technical solution. And while the debate about how to regulate it continues, the ads keep appearing in real time on Japan's social media, every hour of every day. That was the dark side of Japan's internet. Volume 2. Two completely different ways the internet became a tool of predation in one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world. A man who used Twitter to find people in their most vulnerable moments and turn them into his victims. A nameless network that uses X, Instagram, and TikTok to recruit teenagers who never plan to become criminals, and that treats those teenagers as disposable tools while protecting its own leaders behind layers of digital anonymity. In both cases, technology was not the cause of the crime. It was the amplifier, the tool that allowed cruelty, manipulation, and exploitation to operate at a scale and with an efficiency that previously wasn't possible. Which country would you like me to feature in my next video? Let me know in the comments. Bye.